Good evening, friends, and welcome to the Dreary Midnight Podcast. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, they.
My name is Celeste. My pronouns are she, her.
And tonight is a Celeste-led episode, so what are we talking?
Tonight, we are going to talk about tulpas.
Let's get into it. Intro music.
Intro music.
So I have heard of tulpas.
What do you know of them?
So I think it started loosely in Eastern philosophies of some sort. Tibet is coming to mind, but I don't know if that's accurate.
I'm nodding for people who don't know.
It's a creature that you think, like, you create it because you think about a thing, a person, an idea so long that whatever you've been thinking about takes a physical form.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's a very good description, which is great because that means I don't have to go into depth about.
All right. So is that the Spark Notes then?
That's the Spark Notes.
Okay.
I actually started researching this last, a week. We were going to record a week ago.
Yeah.
And there was just so much for this topic that I got overwhelmed and I just couldn't finish on time. And then even coming back to it a few days later, I still got overwhelmed. And so I ended up doing physical notes.
Yeah. Celeste has come in with a whole bunch of...
I have a notebook.
A double-sided 3 to 5 pages, college rules. It is going... You are in for a treat today.
It feels like an essay.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's probably how I should be doing all of these.
I mean, that's
podcasts.
what I started trying to do, but it's hard to do every other week with that kind of a pace.
Yeah.
But anyway, we aren't in college anymore. We have mortgages and rent to pay and shit.
Seriously.
Anyway.
I will say, though, it was kind of nice writing it down because the way that I learn, and this is like a small tangent, but the way that I learn is by writing physically. So it makes me understand it better when I'm physically writing it. And I think that's why I was getting overwhelmed because I was like, I'm reading all these words, but I cannot grasp what they mean. So now that I've written it down, I feel much more confident. So let's get into tulpas. So I was first exposed to the idea of a tulpa when I was watching Supernatural.
Okay.
Did you watch Supernatural?
I have not watched an episode. However, I was on Tumblr in 2013.
Okay. So there's an episode in season 1 that's way back where they are encountering a tulpa, which in that show is described as... It's basically like a monster that was created by the collective thoughts of people. It was like an internet forum that was talking about the attributes of this ghost. And because so many people believed in it, there was an actual ghost, an actual house that became haunted because of it. This isn't completely accurate. And there's something similar to that we'll get into. But
was that? Are you referring to that ghost experiment in the early 20th century or something, where they're like, there's a guy in this house, his name is Philip, and whatever, but Philip was made up?
I don't know what that is, unless the Supernatural referenced that, unless Supernatural episode referenced that. But I'd never heard of that.
Again, I've never seen Supernatural, so I can't say for sure.
Okay.
You hadn't heard of tulpas before Supernatural?
I hadn't heard of tulpas before Supernatural, and I actually, even though they were on our list of podcast topics, I was always too scared to do an episode. Listen, because the whole thing about a tulpa is that it's your brainchild.
Okay.
And I have ADHD, which means I hyperfocus on things.
Okay.
So
same, but
I mean, obviously, if you're thinking about it in a supernatural form, if the idea that you can think about something and suddenly it's true is terrifying to me.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of time in romance novels I have read, and it turns out that my happy, healthy relationship is not with a 7-foot tall guy with wings. I think it's safe to say that if you think about a thing a whole lot, it doesn't always manifest into a tulpa.
I know. Well, anyway, I started doing more research and then I realized that it actually doesn't work that way. I'm going to make a disclaimer that one, there is a modern tulpa community online.
Community of people, of entities that are tulpas or who have created tulpas?
Both.
Okay.
I don't hold any specific opinion on that.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm mostly focusing on the history and the mythology and the supernatural aspect of it.
Yeah.
Two, the sources that I've read all say that it starts from Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay.
I don't know enough about Buddhism or Tibet or their history to say for sure that these sources are correct. This is just what I've gleaned from the research that I've done. So I don't want to infer that anything that I'm saying is 100% accurate to a pre-existing religion.
Yes. Yeah. And if any experts on Tibet Buddhism or the combination therein are listening and would like to send in corrections, we will happily read it at our next recording and air it at our next recording.
Yes. With those disclaimers, let's get into it.
Yeah.
So the use of a tulpa, it started out as a meditation tool in Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay.
So in Buddhist texts, we see the word Nirmida or Nirmida. Once again, I do not know how to pronounce things. I'm sorry. I feel like I make that disclaimer every single episode.
As John Green once said, mispronouncing things is my thing. So
the word Nirmida refers to something constructed or built. And in Buddhist texts, it's typically refers to something that is conjured, which is and seen and perceived as real, but not actually existing. In Tibetan, Nirmida is translated as Tulpa, which is defined as a magical creation, emanation, phantom. It's apparitional.
Okay. So yes magic, yes ghost.
Similar. Yeah, okay. It's it doesn't necessarily it's basically magically created apparition. So, do you know what a thought form is, or have you thought of a thought form? Have you I
have heard the phrase, I don't have a definition for it.
Yeah, have you heard of it? Okay.
Yeah.
So, thought forms, a record of clairvoyant investigation, is a 1905 theosophical. Okay.
Theosophical?
Theosophical book. That is the theosophy. I don't know what theosophy is, to be honest.
I was about to ask, so I'm going to Google it right now. Here, Merriam-Webster. Theosophy, noun. Definition 1, teaching about God and the world based on mystical insight. Definition 2, when the T is capitalized, the teaching of a modern movement originating in the U.S. in 1875 and following a chiefly Buddhist and Brahmanic theories, especially of pantheistic evolution and reincarnation.
It's that one.
It combines roots meaning God and wisdom, appeared back in the 17th century, so the 1600s.
Mm-hmm.
But the well-known religious movement by that name under the leadership of the Russian Helena Blavatsky appeared only around 1875. Blavatsky's theosophy combined elements of Plato's philosophy with Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu thought, including reincarnation, in a way that she claimed had been divinely related to her. The Theosophical Society, founded in 1875 to promote her beliefs, still exists, as does the Anthroposophical Society, founded by her follower Rudolf Steiner. And that is from Merriam-Webster.
Isn't it amazing how many things we learn?
Yeah.
The world is so big.
The world is so big and it is so wild.
So there's a 1905 theosophical book called Thought Forms, a record of clairvoyant investigation that is written by Annie Besant and Charles Webster Leadbeater.
Okay.
So in this book, the authors wrote, in quotes, each definite thought produces a double effect, a radiating vibration in a floating form, end quote. They also introduced the term thought form, which wasn't a new concept, but now had a catchy name.
Okay.
So in this...
What's the concept behind a thought form? Or are you about to get into that?
I'm about to get into that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot here.
Okay.
In the spiritual world, a thought form is a manifestation of the thoughts, ideas, or emotions of someone.
Okay.
It is believed to be able to be sensed by people and take physical form within the spirit world.
Okay. So, yes, 7-foot-tall winged fairy guys, but only in spiritual areas, not necessarily coming through your window in a few minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
So the Besant and Leadbeater book defines 3 classes of thought forms.
Okay.
There's 1, that which takes the image of the thinker. A man thinks of himself in some distant place or wishes to be in that place and makes a thought form of his own image there.
Okay, so, so if I'm thinking of Lisa going to,
Bora Bora.
Okay. Okay, so Lisa's on the beach, Lisa's thinking about laying out on the beach in Bora Bora. Is another double of Lisa going to turn up on the beach in Bora Bora in this?
Maybe there are instances.
Under definition 1, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so... Have you heard of Padre Pio?
Mm-mm.
He was a priest in, I don't know what era, maybe like the early 1900 or mid 1900s. But apparently one of his religious powers, I guess, is that he could be in 2 places at once.
Oh,
is that people would see him in church in one place, but he would be doing a confession for somebody in another church, like 400 miles away.
Yeah.
So, like, I think it's kind of like that where you think really hard about being at a beach in Bora Bora, and then a passerby in Bora Bora might see the image of Lisa getting a tan, and then...
Or lots and lots of freckles and skin cancer.
And then
shout
suddenly
out to
that
Grandpa
Lisa
Robinson. Yeah.
is gone.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
A projection, if you will.
I mean, if I think really hard that I could get a 10 and not burn in 45 seconds, shout out to my Irish great-grandparents.
The second class of thought form is that which takes the image of some material object. Think of a painter who forms the concept of a future picture, projects it onto the space in front of him, and then copies it onto a canvas.
Okay.
Or a novelist who builds images of his characters and puppets them to make the plot of his story.
Okay. But they stay on...
I guess that one medium would be then, if I'm thinking of the painting example, I guess that one would then be a physical manifestation, but it's a physical manifestation because the painter painted it.
But in any other circumstance, it stays in the medium it is produced.
Yeah.
So you wind up with a painting or a narrative out of it. It's not necessarily going to walk off the page or walk off the canvas or anything like that. Yeah. Also, Clem the dog is up and about, so if you hear any little tippy tappies, that is what is happening.
Her little nails on the tile floor.
Honestly, I am very happy because we've been doing this podcast for how many years, and Clementine is finally walking up to me without...
To be fair.
Yeah. I did give Clem a brand new treat.
Well, that too. But I was saying, to be fair, we mostly used to record at your apartment.
Yes.
And it wasn't until recently that we started doing...
Yeah, switching off.
Switching.
But yeah, I am just very happy because Clem is licking my hand of her own free will, and I'm finally one of her own. Anyway.
I think it helped when you were helping me move and put her in air jail.
Yes.
And we're just holding her for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Anyway. The third class of thought form is what we're mostly going to be talking about.
Okay.
That which takes a form entirely of its own, expressing its inherent qualities in the matter which it draws around it.
Okay.
So.
Can you say that entire thing one more time because my brain shorted out?
That which takes a form entirely its own.
Okay.
expressing its inherent qualities in the matter which it draws round it.
Okay.
We will get into what that means.
Matter as in like solid, liquid, gas.
It
okay.
becomes, to an extent, a reality.
Okay. So to combine things, it's not necessarily staying on the canvas or on the page. It's like walking out and doing God knows what.
This is where it gets confusing because some sources say, yeah, it's like a real thing that you can see and touch. And some people say, no, it's just in your brain. But it feels real.
It feels real, but it's your brain misinterpreting the shadow as the 7 foot tall guy with wings. I don't know why I'm keeping going with this example, but
You're just
I guess
really
it's a
into
theme
ACOTAR, I guess.
I guess I had an ACOTAR phase. I don't know. It's been fun of mine.
But we're gonna get because they're physical notes. I couldn't go back and edit, so I left myself notes on like where to jump.
Okay, love that.
So this one says read Tulpa stuff. Okay, back to Tulpas.
Yeah.
According to some sources, because, and this was the disclaimer I said earlier, the modern idea of a tulpa is so different than the Buddhist definition of it. But according to some sources, tulpas originated as a thought entity created as a result of long-term discipline, desires, and focused trance work. So meditation.
So, but you would have to work at it.
You would have to work at it.
Yeah.
You have to be intentional with it.
Yeah. So it's not just Joe Schmo doing one read through of their favorite novel. It's like you have to go and meditate and work and work and work. And when you get to like advanced meditation, maybe you can start at it type of a thing. Okay.
We'll see later that there's some instances where it might have been unintentional, but for the most part, you do have to actually work at it. I couldn't really find any sources talking about why the Tibetan monks would do this. And there was one video I listened to that was talking about reasons, but they didn't source they didn't put their sources. So
yeah,
but the reasons that they said was that it was a purpose of tulpa was a way to better oneself by like manifesting a projection of a flaw or a strength that one wants to overcome or embody.
Okay.
So
like meditating so long about being a better person who shows up on time and does all of these things, you manifest it so hard you make it happen.
It could be that. I think it could be like if you have a fear. I think the example they use is like if you have a fear of a spider and then you manifest somebody who's not afraid of spiders or something. So yeah, like basically like manifesting someone who, like a projection of somebody who is like holding a spider and isn't afraid. Then you can dismiss the manifestation once you're like...
Once you have embodied that person.
Exactly.
So it sounds like the eventual goal is that you're gonna work out that manifestation and it's gonna come back to the originator at a certain point.
Yeah.
So or at least that's the idea.
In the Tibetan Buddhism thing, it was like I said before, it's like phantom apparition. It's not seen as like an actual person.
And you wouldn't necessarily be able to touch and hold it like I'm touching and holding my lip balm right now.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
But there's also, the whole projection of like if you need it elsewhere, like the Padre Pio thing I was talking about,
Yeah.
If you're helping one person and then you have to go talk to another person.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Okay.
Now, the idea of tulpas as we know them starts with Alexandra David Neal.
Okay.
So, Alexandra David Neal, who lived from 1868 to 1969, was a Belgian-French explorer, spiritualist, Buddhist, anarchist, opera singer, and writer.
What a resume.
I know. She's most known for her 1924 visit to Lhasa, Tibet, when it was forbidden to foreigners.
Huh.
Yeah. Now, David Neal wrote over 30 books about Eastern religion, philosophy, and her travels, including Magic and Mystery in Tibet, published in 1929.
Okay.
Now, David Neal brought the idea of tulpas into the Western world via this book. She described tulpas as, quote, magical creations produced by a strong concentration of thought, end quote. She believed tulpas were capable of developing their own mind. Quote, when the tulpa becomes sufficiently vital to play the role of a real being, it tends to free itself from the control of its creator. This takes place almost mechanically, as a child leaving the maternal womb when it has reached full development and can live independently, end quote.
Okay.
So she's saying it can be its own entity.
Thing. Yeah.
Yes. So I have here excerpts from her book. I'm not going to read all of it, obviously. There are some things she talks about when it comes to tulpas. So there are 3 little stories that she talks about. The first one is about a young Tibetan monk who was helping her out, and he wanted to go see his family. So she gave him like, oh, come back in 3 weeks. After that, I'm going to need you to like, get me some food and all this other stuff that he was helping her with.
Yeah.
And he was gone for 2 months. And she was like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure he just left. Like, he's just not coming back, right?
Yeah.
So one night in a dream, she saw him coming to her, but he was like wearing foreign clothes. He was wearing a strange hat that he'd never worn before.
Okay.
And so she was like, okay, whatever. The next morning, another monk came out to her and was like, oh, so-and-so is back. And she was like, okay. And so she went to see him go, like she can see through the mountain, like the path that he's taking. And he's wearing the same hat.
Huh.
And she's like, oh, that's a coincidence. And so they were watching him. He was dressed exactly as I seen in my dream. He was alone and walking slowly up the path that wound up the hill slope. So Alexandra and this other monk were watching him, and then they saw him disappear behind like a structure, and they thought maybe he's just sitting and resting for a bit, but then it was a while, and when they went to go see, he wasn't there.
Huh.
I know. And then the same day, a little before dusk, he appeared in the valley with his caravan with all the food and stuff. He wore the very same dress and foreign sun hat which I had seen in my dream and in the morning vision. So her inferment is that he somehow accidentally created a tulpa of himself.
Yeah.
Both in the dream form and in the morning before he had actually...
Yeah.
Like his intention, I guess, was so strong.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're thinking ahead, if you know you're going to have to go uphill and you're like thinking ahead about the route, like, if you know it's going to be uphill for hours and hours, you're going to think ahead about where your rest stops could be. And if you think about, oh, okay, well, there's a hut over here I can use, like,
Exactly. Yeah. The second instance she talks about is a painter, a Tibetan painter who went to visit her, and she noticed behind him one of the shapes of these things that he would paint, like forms, particular forms. And she noticed one of these forms that he usually paints behind him while he was talking to her. And she was like, oh my God, she freaked out. And he turned around, he didn't see anything. And then she said that she walked to the apparition with one arm outstretched in front. My hand reached the foggy form. I felt as if touching a soft object whose substance gave way under the light push, and the vision vanished. The painter confessed that he was performing a rite calling on a deity. He was calling on a specific deity, and I guess she had perceived that deity, but he hadn't perceived that deity. But it was his own thoughts that were then physically seen by somebody else.
Huh. That's wild.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's so wild.
And then there was a last one where basically this was one of concentration. She had noticed somebody sitting and meditating, and then somebody else had went and talked to him in a tent somewhere else. And when she came back, when the guy came back to say, oh, I was talking to so-and-so. She was like, but he was right here. And they were like, no, he wasn't. Like, I was just talking to him over there. This is the most famous thing that she's done. Well, obviously not the most famous, but for
the topic today.
For our topic, she created a tulpa. I'm going to read, it's not long, but I'm going to read from her book this excerpt of her creating a tulpa. So, quote, in order to avoid being influenced by the forms of the Lamias deities, which I saw daily around me in paintings and images, I chose for my experiment a most insignificant character, a monk, short and fat, of an innocent and jolly type. I shut myself in psalms and proceeded to perform the prescribed concentration of thought and other rites. After a few months, the phantom monk was formed. His form grew gradually fixed and lifelike looking. He became a kind of guest living in my apartment. I then broke my seclusion and started for a tour with my servants and tents. The monk included himself in the party. Though I lived in the open riding on horseback for miles each day, the illusion persisted. I saw the fat Trappa now and then. It was not necessary for me to think of him to make him appear. The phantom performed various actions of the kind that are natural to travelers and that I had not commanded. For instance, he walked, stopped, looked around him. The illusion was mostly visual, but sometimes I felt as if a robe was lightly rubbing against me, and once a hand seemed to touch my shoulder. The features which I had imagined when building my phantom gradually underwent a change. The fat, chubby-cheeked fellow grew leaner. His face assumed a vaguely mocking, sly, malignant look. He became more troublesome and bold. In brief, he escaped my control. Once a herdsman who brought me a present of butter saw the tulpa in my tent and took it for a live llama. Not llama the animal, llama the
religious figure, as in Dalai Lama.
Exactly. I ought to have let the phenomenon follow its course, but the presence of that unwanted companion began to prove trying to my nerves. It turned into a day nightmare. Moreover, I was beginning to plan my journey to Lhasa and needed a quiet brain devoid of other preoccupations, so I decided to dissolve the phantom. I succeeded, but only after 6 months of hard struggle. My mind creature was tenacious of life. There is nothing strange in the fact that I may have created my own hallucination. The interesting point is that in these cases of materialization, others see the thought forms that have been created. Tibetans disagree in their explanations of such phenomena. Some think a material form is really brought into being. Others consider the apparition as a mere case of suggestion, the creator's thought impressing others and causing them to see what he himself sees.
Okay.
So, end quote.
Yeah.
So that's her creating her thought form.
And who was this one more time?
This was Alexandria David Neal.
Okay, so the opera singer, anarchist, everything.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
The explorer who wrote that book. So then she wrote the book. She brought it back to the Western world.
Okay.
And theology. Is that what we were talking about before?
Theosophy.
And it basically eventually snowballed into modern tulpamancy.
Okay.
So a tulpamancer is somebody who creates a tulpa.
Okay.
In recent times, there has been a community built surrounding tulpas, mostly through online platforms such as Reddit.
Okay.
Don't want to get too much into it. I don't personally understand it.
Okay.
But my intention is not to make fun of or offend people who do this, but people basically use tulpas to combat isolation, loneliness, and social anxiety.
Makes sense.
They are mostly used for companionship.
Okay.
So it often begins as somebody imagining a character, and then that transforms into its own version or entity that has its own thoughts and feelings. But like I said, like David Neal said, there's kind of I don't know if people really agree on whether it's just something that's a hallucination or something that is physically real.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. My opinion of it is that I and I don't know if it's controversial or anything, but I think it's an unhealthy coping mechanism.
Okay.
At best, and inviting an unknown entity at worst.
Yeah,
Because
that makes
if
sense.
it is a physically real thing, that's concerning.
Yeah.
To
And
me.
Yeah, and you don't know what you brought into your house if it turns out to be a real thing,
Exactly.
Right?
Because if let's suspend disbelief and let's say ghosts are real. Let's say
Okay.
demons are real.
Okay.
How do you know that you're not accidentally inviting in some sort of paranormal or supernatural thing?
And you don't know what that entity's intentions towards you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like how David Neal started off with her little fat fryer and then suddenly it transformed into something negative.
Yes.
And I think that kind of, this is why I don't do Ouija boards.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, why would you tempt fate? You know?
Yeah.
There's been on these forums, like, there has been instances of tulpas wanting to take over the like host body, if that makes sense. Like there was a horror story, not a horror story for real, but like there was a person who made a tulpa, and then that tulpa wanted to basically be in control of the host body. Like it wanted to kind of like take over this person's life, and so then they had to, like, I don't know if they dissolved their tulpa, but either way, it's just, after doing a lot of research into it, it's something that, this is exactly what I was afraid of, right?
Yeah.
Like in that supernatural episode of accidentally creating something more powerful than you can control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And speaking of the supernatural episode, what they actually were talking about wasn't tulpas in Supernatural.
Okay.
After some research, they were actually talking about egregores.
What's an egregore?
I don't know if it's egregore or egregore, but I'm just going to say egregore, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Send us an email. drearymidnightpodcast@gmail.com.
But it's a concept in Western esotericism of a non-physical entity or thought form that arises from the collective thoughts and emotions of a distinct group of individuals.
So if all of the ghost tour guides got together and thought really hard about bringing one of our ghosts to life, that would do it. But
yes.
that would be an egregore. But if it was just me, it would be a tulpa.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's the difference between a group and an individual.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yes. So egregores are spiritual entities that feed off the thoughts and energy of a unified multitude. They are created by the power of thought, both conscious and subconscious, and belief. And that's what freaks me out. It's that, like, subconsciously somebody could actually do this. It doesn't freak me out as much now that I'm learning to control my brain, but as someone with undiagnosed ADHD and intrusive thoughts, it's kind of easy to see, like, why I can be afraid of my own brain sometimes. Yeah. So they are created by the power of thought. They bring people together to service a common goal. Okay. And these groups, they can be considered dangerous because they have the potential to be, like, for example, religions, sports clubs, cults could all technically be egregores.
That makes sense.
Because they are like the collective unified thought form of a group.
Yes.
They are oftentimes unintentional. They're oftentimes unintentional. And they provide a sense of belonging and identity, and a structure for beliefs. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. When an egregore is powerful, it can take action on its own. Yeah. So a example of a very negative egregore would be the People's Temple at Jonestown.
Oh, yeah.
1978.
Yeah.
So they can be personified as good or evil, but are oftentimes indifferent to human concerns. But egregores are usually negative because people are more inclined to believe in bad energies than in good ones. Which is like the Supernatural episode when they were creating a ghost that was like a killer ghost or something. Yeah. In my personal hypothesis, I think Slender Man is an egregore.
Huh.
Now, there has been discussion online that Slenderman is a tulpa because of the fact that like people think about it and then it like becomes almost like a real thing.
Yeah.
I think Slenderman is more of an egregore. I think Slenderman is the real life example of that supernatural episode where through the power of the internet and the power of suggestion, people make this entity that like it was obviously made as a competition, right? In a competition.
Yeah.
But it's now kind of made its own form in that it's like suddenly now an actual urban legend.
Yeah.
To the point where, you know, that girl almost got murdered.
Yeah.
Because they believed that Slenderman was real.
So I guess the follow-up question for that, because you made me think of that, but the follow-up question, I think, is how many people are required of Tulpa versus egregore? Like if it's an egregore, is it just 2 or more, or is it, do you need like 3, or?
I suppose if we're thinking of Slenderman, he would be a Tulpa of the man who created him.
Yeah.
But an egregore of everybody.
Yeah.
In that space.
So,
but is he a Tulpa of the man who created him? If he was just a character?
I think he was just the character. But I ask about the numbers because specifically, I think a lot of internet users are kind of aware of the stories, but are like, you can find out within 30 to 40 seconds of Googling. Like, there's a ton of articles about, like, here's the origins of Slenderman, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of internet discussion if you're curious about it, right? Whereas if an egregore requires maybe 2 people, 2 or 3 people, I think it was just that group of 2 or 3 girls who, like, specifically 1 or 2 of them were convinced that if you kill the third, or like kill somebody, blood sacrifice, something, but it became obviously a real thing for this group of 12-year-olds. And then it turns out like the one that was leading it was also as an adult got diagnosed with a couple of things, which made things make more sense.
That's kind of a criticism with tulpas, is it basically just I don't know how to say this in a kind way, but are you basically giving yourself schizophrenia?
Yeah.
If you're making yourself hallucinate, I mean, that's a criticism. I don't think it's true.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like one of those things where I think it's a target. I don't know. Egregores are really interesting to me because they are very often not intentional, and it is just the mind, like the hive mind as a whole.
Yeah.
Like, I think there was an article that said theoretically Facebook and Twitter could be considered egregore because it's a hive mind and people basically act differently because of the stuff that they see on there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think Slenderman is the most solid example that I have that I thought of while I was doing the research. You know, I'm just smart like that. But and then, like, if anybody listening is interested in the idea of modern tulpamancy, or like similar to what we just talked about but more in depth, the YouTube video I listened to was by One Candle Society.
Okay.
And they had an episode about tulpas, and they get into it more in depth for the modern ones, and they also get into sort of the ethics of it, which I think is really interesting.
Okay.
So that's my recommended reading. But honestly, other than that, like, I know that I said other than that as if I didn't just give you like 5 or 6 pages of notes.
Yeah.
But that's basically all I have. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Once again, I don't want to offend anybody, you know, from a third party perspective. I just think all of this is really fascinating stuff.
Yes. We come at it with absolute love. If we did not show the correct amount or kind of care, please send us an email. drearymidnightpodcast@gmail.com is the best place to do that. Do we have any other Any final thoughts?
My final thoughts are that it's almost tempting to try to make a tulpa. Honestly, when I was doing my research, I was like, but don't.
Should we make a tulpa for Patreon?
I don't think so. Just the same way that I'm not going to fuck with Ouija boards.
That's fair.
I'm not going to fuck with tulpas.
Yep.
Supernatural taught me don't do that.
Yeah. All right. And if you would like to tell us if you would fuck with tulpas, shoot us an email, drearymidnightpodcast@gmail.com. And if you would like to get in touch with the show on Instagram, we're at drearymidnightpod. If you want to support us on Patreon, we are still working on a couple of behind the scenes things, but it's peak season, so things are going to come at you a little bit slower. Patreon.com/drearymidnight. And with all of that said,
honestly,
keep yourself healthy.
Keep yourself healthy.
Don't fuck with tulpas.
Don't fuck with tulpas.
Unless you know what you're doing.
I don't even know.
So Celeste should not fuck with tulpas.
I should not fuck with tulpas.
So stay safe, stay hydrated, and safe travels home on this dreary midnight. Good night.
Good night.